All
That
living,
travel guy was like half a
all living things need to move things around, right? To transport, we would call that, things from one area to another. And so, how do humans do that? How does stuff get around in our body? Yeah, through our circulatory system, we call it, through our blood, our heart, our veins, and arteries. We have what's called a closed circulatory system. All of the blood in our body is held within blood vessels, we call them arteries, veins, capillaries. And we have our heart, which is a four-chambered heart that we'll talk about, to pump that blood throughout our body. That's sort of the overview of our circulatory system. So our blood's in these vessels, we call them, arteries, veins, and capillaries, and they're filled with blood. We have about 4 to 6 liters of blood. That's about a gallon and a half. That's how much blood is in our circulatory system. And our blood is really, it's a fluid, it's liquid with a bunch of components kind of floating around, being carried from place to place within our body. And so what is the function of our blood, our circulatory system? It's, well, to carry things like oxygen to all the parts of our body, to carry nutrients throughout our body, hormones, water, all sorts of things are carried in our blood. It also carries white blood cells, which help us fight infections. It has special parts to clot our blood to prevent us from bleeding. It also is responsible for distributing heat and removing excess heat, etc. So we're going to talk pretty extensively about the circulatory system, about our blood and what it does, its function, the heart, etc. So here's what our blood's made of. You know, when we see, if you see blood, if you had blood drawn somewhere, or you get a cut, it's not just like a red liquid. It actually is a fluid that's kind of yellowish in color. If you separate the parts of the blood, there's like a yellow liquid part, and then there's about 45% is the blood cells and other things. So we call the liquid part the plasma, and then the other stuff is red blood cells, white blood cells, and platelets are the main things. The plasma of our blood, that's the liquid part, right? That's like imagine like a river carrying like pebbles and leaves and stuff in it. The liquid part of our blood is the plasma. Most of that is just water, 90% water, but there's other stuff dissolved there, proteins, nutrients, etc. Here's what blood looks like when it's separated. This is the plasma part of the blood. And then the blood cells and other parts are below. The plasma's job really is to carry all the other parts and also to carry carbon dioxide and other materials. Because remember, our blood transports carbon dioxide from our cells so that we can get rid of it. Okay? Yeah, they're normally mixed all together. But this blood has been centrifuged. A centrifuge is a little tool. You put like a cylinder of blood in it, and it spins around really fast. What happens, it causes the parts to separate. That's why the blood looks like this. Normally, it's all mixed evenly. Red blood cells, we see here, they have like a flattened, kind of disc-shaped. What's their main job of a red blood cell? Okay? Well, they're part of our blood, but they attach to something really important and bring it from place to place. What is something we cannot live without for even a short period of time? Oxygen. That's what the red blood cells, their main job is to carry oxygen. They also carry a little bit of carbon dioxide. And interesting, these cells, they don't have a nucleus. Basically, their structure is just for carrying oxygen. Yeah, and so there's millions of them in just a tiny milliliter of blood. Here's what red blood cells look like just on their own. That's a blood packet that they would maybe give to somebody who needed a blood transfusion. And our blood is actually, it's created, red blood cells in our bones, in the bone marrow. So in your like femur and your humerus, at the core of those bones is an area called the bone marrow, and that's where these cells are produced by our body. Our red blood cells are constantly dying and being produced again all the time. Millions of cells per day die, and millions of cells per day are produced by our bone marrow. So we have our plasma, which carries everything. We have the red blood cells. Then we have these little things called platelets. Do you know what they do? Platelets? Huh? Yeah. We call that clotting. They are responsible for blood to form clots. Now, you might be thinking, like, well, isn't that a bad thing to form blood clots? Is it? Correct. And yeah. Yeah, so blood clots can be good and can be bad. Blood clots can save our life or they can cause our death. It depends on where they're located. When are blood clots necessary? Like Kaya just kind of said it. What'd you say, Kaya? Yeah, when you get a cut, right, you bleed. But what happens is these platelets start to clump up and they kind of form like a mesh over the cut. And they help stop you from bleeding. If you didn't have any platelets and you got a cut, you would just continue bleeding. And so there are some people that have a disease when their blood doesn't clot properly. It's called hemophilia. It could be, yes, and they could be deadly. Like they bruise really easily because a bruise of bleeding under your skin. Yeah, so those are good blood clots, right? If you get a cut, you need to seal it up, and that's what these platelets do. However, like Isaiah was talking about, if blood clots form in our circulatory system and are kind of moving around our body, if they get stuck somewhere, like in a blood vessel going to your brain or to your heart, it can cause a heart attack or a stroke because blood won't be able to flow past them. So usually they don't form like that. Sometimes people form blood clots internally, which can be dangerous, and they might have to be on a medication that reduces that. But normally our blood only clots when there's been damage to our blood vessels. They're made also in the bone marrow, and they require vitamin K. And so sometimes if a person were deficient, they didn't get enough vitamin K, they might not have enough platelets and their blood might not clot properly. And then the last part, white blood cells. What do they do? Yeah, they are our body's defense system, our immune system. They protect us from infection. They do have a nucleus. And there's our immune system is really complicated. There's many different types of cells, and there's a complex series of processes that take place when we're exposed to a pathogen. But the overall thing you should know is that white blood cells help to fight off infection. They're much larger than a red blood cell, typically, or there's less of them. They're bigger than platelets. You can see them here. They look very distinct. They're not red, obviously. And their job is to defend us, to find any pathogens, in our body and engulf them, destroy them, so we don't become sick. There we see this is a white blood cell that's devouring a bacteria. So this is protecting from infection. There's another type of white blood cell fighting off bacteria. So let's talk about kind of the main motor of our circulatory system. The blood doesn't just go around our body on its own. It has to be pumped there. And our blood is pumped throughout our body by our heart. Our heart has sort of two separate sides, two separate pumps. One side of our heart receives deoxygenated blood. What do you think that word means? Deoxygenated. Yeah, without oxygen. Blood that's kind of used up. Right? It already gave oxygen to our cells. Now it doesn't have any oxygen. That blood is pumped to the right by the right side of our heart. What do you think the left side of the heart pumps? Oxygenated blood, correct. And that pumps that oxygenated blood all throughout our body so that our cells can get the oxygen and the nutrients that they need. Our heart has to work really hard, right? It has to pump once a second our whole lifetime. So it has its own special blood vessels that give it oxygen and nutrients. You might think, well, it doesn't need that because it's filled up with blood. But the muscle on the outside actually needs its own supply of blood. They're called coronary arteries. And these are the arteries that are, it's really important for them to function properly, because if they don't, the heart doesn't get oxygen and it stops pumping. That's what a heart attack might be. Or if a person has bypass surgery, and you have, I'll talk about it in a little bit, to go around any blockages. Huh? They can only sort of, like if you had a big cut, a big wound, the platelets can't seal it off. It's just too big. You would lose too much blood. They can only sort of stop bleeding, of a manageable size cut. That's why, like, if you get a cut, you're supposed to like apply pressure if you have a wound, because applying pressure stops the blood from flowing out, obviously, and gives the platelets time to kind of connect together to seal up that damage. Yeah, that putting, like, if you have a wound, you have to put pressure on it to stop the bleeding. But again, if it's a huge wound, a big cut, then the platelets on their own, they can't clump it up to that extent. So when our heart beats, it contracts, we call it, and it squeezes and pumps the blood into our blood vessels, into our arteries. And every time it does that, our blood pressure increases, right? The pressure of the blood forcing on our veins increases in our arteries. It's why we could feel our pulse. If you remember back, we did the making connections, we measure our pulse. Like, now what you're feeling, okay, is an artery, carotid artery in your neck when you do this. And every time your heart beats, this artery in your neck swells up a little bit because there's pressure on it. And you could feel it with your fingers. You could feel it in your wrists. Okay? Your pulse is just every time your heart beats, these arteries swelling up. And the amount of pressure on your blood vessels is something that they measure all the time. The doctor measures, right? If you go to the doctor, they put the cuff on you, and we'll try this ourselves in a little bit. What they're measuring, when the doctor tells you your blood pressure, what is it like? How do they tell it to you? Have you ever heard the number? Did your doctor or the nurse ever tell you? It's like, it's a fraction. It's like 110 over 60 or 120 over 80. So they're giving you two numbers. Okay, the higher number is when your heart is contracting and it exerts high pressure, right? And then when your heart relaxes, that's the second number. Like 120 over 80 means when your heart contracted, the force of the blood on your blood vessels was 120 milligrams. And then when your heart was relaxing, the pressure was less, obviously. How quickly your heart is beating is controlled by special cells in your heart called the pacemaker. It keeps your heart beating at the right rate, beating regularly. Did you ever? So my mom, for example, was having a heart problem, and when she went to the hospital, they had to put a pacemaker in, a little electronic device they put. It's actually under her skin, and it has little wires that connect it to the heart. And if her heart's not beating at the proper rate, this little device in her body sends a little electric charge to make her heart beat at the right level. Yeah. It's a fairly common procedure to have that put in, especially as you get older. Oh, really? The pacemaker or the surgery?
Pacemaker.
Really? I haven't really heard about that very often. All right. Pause for a minute. Yep. Mm-hmm. All right. Oh, I did attendance. Probably for some people. What? Oh, I thought we did. All right, thank you. Yes, I did.
Did you forget to hit submit?
No, I thought I did it. I know you did. My mouse is like stuck. All right. You can see if I actually took attendance. Oh, nope, I didn't. All right. Was that a long time ago, Kate, or just last year? Oh, you look so young. Okay. All right. Well, actually, let me give you this first. We're going to try to, I've never tried this with students. All right. Open up these little picks. We got two things. Stethoscope. What's a stethoscope for? It might listen to your heart. It might listen to your breathing. You can put that earbud. Call it earpieces in. Try to listen to your heart. See if you can. Yep. Yeah. Get you out to your shirt. Move it around a bit. The left side of your chest maybe a little bit. Can you hear your heart? Mm-hmm. Everyone fine? Happy to hear your heart? You can hear it? Try in your elbow. That's probably not really changing that much, I would think. Maybe just like lost the sound of it. So listen to it in your arm. Yeah. A little higher, like right where your elbow bends. Right there on your elbow. A little lower. Can you hear it in your elbow? Take out your things for a minute. I'm going to show you this quick video. It tells you about. So,
Echoing because
oh, really? So when you go to the doctor and they take your blood pressure, like what does the nurse do?
wraps this around your arm.
Yeah, so she puts a cuff, or he puts a cuff around your arm. Where do they put it?
Above the elbow.
Above the elbow. And then what do they do? But what's with the stethoscope? Yeah, they listen while they pump and release the air. So hold on, you don't have to put it on yet. Let me show you what they're actually doing. So they're listening for your heart. And here's what the process is.
Manual or aneroid equipment includes a cuff, an attached pump, a stethoscope, and a gauge. This equipment requires coordination. It's difficult to use if you're hearing or visually impaired, or if you're unable to perform the hand movements needed to squeeze the bulb and inflate the cuff. When you're ready to take your blood pressure, sit quietly for 3 to 5 minutes beforehand. To begin, place the cuff on your bare upper arm, 1 inch above the bend of your elbow. Pull the end of the cuff so that it's evenly tight around your arm. You should place it tight enough so that you can only slip 2 fingertips under the top edge of the cuff. Make sure your skin doesn't pinch when the cuff inflates. Once the cuff is on, place the disc of the stethoscope face down under the cuff, just to the inner side of your upper arm. Next, place the stethoscope earpieces in your ears, with the earpieces facing forward, pointing toward the tip of your nose. Rest the gauge in the open palm of the hand of your cuffed arm so that you can clearly see it. Then squeeze the pump rapidly with your opposite hand until the gauge reads 30 points above your usual systolic pressure. Stop squeezing. Turn the knob on the pump toward you to let the air out slowly. Let the pressure fall 2 millimeters or lines on the dial per second while listening for your heart sounds. Note the reading when you first hear a heartbeat. This is your systolic pressure. Note when you no longer hear the beating sounds. This is your diastolic pressure. Rest quietly and wait about 1 to 2 minutes before taking another measurement. Record your numbers either by writing the information down or by entering the information into an electronic personal health record.
All right. Well, I'll show you the whole video again so you can do it. So before you do that, so the cuff goes to your upper arm, the stethoscope goes under it and the inside. You close the valve, you close that little screw valve. That allows you to keep the pressure in it. And eventually, you won't hear your heart anymore. And then you turn the valve the other way and slowly let the pressure out. And you're going to hear your heart come back. That's the first number. Then, as the pressure relieves, you'll eventually stop hearing it. That's the second number. All right? Want to try it? No. So these ones, let me cancel this. No, this one's pretty long. Yeah, come on. Yeah, this is even. That's kind of weird. How'd you get that thing on there, dude?
Like how the doctors do. Then you extend the ring thingy out so you have the.
No, this thing.
The clip
No, this. Or was it out?
is already.
Oh, no.
Well, that'll be a.
Can you read it there?
Yeah. Wait, did she say we have to like put this on too?
So that goes under, like on the inside. So you probably won't hear it until you come back. So you don't have to really run. Yeah.
Yes, you know.
All right. All right. Did you get it, Creed? So pump it up.
I didn't hear it until 60.
Well, pump it up. You won't hear it now. You won't hear it until you pump it up high.
I know I gotta go up to 160 and I didn't hear it until I got to 160.
Okay, so that's your first number. Did I mess it up?
No, it's not like.
110 is my first.
110? Okay. So that I wrote down.
I want
Is it not getting tight enough? $50, and then you should be able to hear it.
Yeah.
What?
I can't feel my hand.
Yeah, well, you shouldn't leave it pumped up after you should.
It's there.
You leave it on there for a while.
Is it right on the, put your hand there, right there? So you want to cover like that thing right there. You want it to like go over the vein that goes in there.
I see yours, kid. We should go up to like 150 maybe. 150 or something, yeah. And then once we get up there, you won't be.
I left the marriage. Okay. Did you hear it? Remember what the directions were? You gotta pump it until you stop hearing it, right?
You'll pump, yeah, you'll stop, it'll start and stop again, yeah.
What was the number that you stopped hearing? What was the number that you stopped hearing? Alright, so you have to hear it.
So you pump it up high, it's gonna be gone. Then you let it out. You start to hear it, that's the first number. Then you stop hearing it, that's the lower number. So pump it up high. You gotta let it out slow so you can hear it come back.
That's when you heard it. Okay, so when you pump it up, when you start to let it out, you're gonna hear it. That's gonna be the top number. When you stop hearing it, that'll be the bottom. So you have to watch this. So when you start to hear it, you record the number it's holding. When you stop hearing it, put it in there. Oh, no. I'll just do it. Yeah. Or just look at it and see, did you see what the numbers were? Did you see what your numbers were? I think you're the shop right now.
Workshop sounds good.
Did you hear the numbers? Did you see what the numbers were when you heard it? Well, if your blood pressure is at 20, then that's concerning. 60? Okay, well, okay, let me start there. The first one. Okay, so the first thing you hear in heartbeat, that's gonna be your top number. Are you listening? Or you can't be listening to me and you're here. Tell me what I just told you. The number that you start to hear it is going to be your top number. And when you stop hearing it, you see what's pointing it, and that will be your bottom number. Right? So do that.
Keep going, go a little higher. Go higher. Yeah. Right now, let it out slow. Real fast. And I'll just flat. No. If you open a little bit, then if you just turn that a tiny bit, it'll go down slower, and then it's easier to hear when it comes in. That's one side. This is just faster.
Start again, innovating.
So probably what's gonna happen is probably if you guys like let it 40 or something, it's gonna start going on probably like a 110 or 150, 120, 130. You'll hear it come back.
We're gonna place really. Zippers.
You pump it up high and it stops. And then you're listening for when it comes down. So you just sort of have to get it high enough that there's nothing. Then you slowly let it down. And then it stops. It doesn't matter how fast you pump up, it's when you let it down and when you let it slow. Just turn it a little bit so it goes slow so you can just, when you hear it come back, you're gonna look at the number. Try one more time. But it's not close. Yeah.
Do you wipe those earpiece things off?
I have one of them.
Yeah, I hope,
Yeah. I took it from one of my teachers when I was in like second grade.
Yeah.
She just had a whole bunch around her room.
It was in second grade. You mean stethoscope or like the whole blood pressure?
No,
Oh, the stethoscope.
it's like 5.
Like the shit for.
Yeah.
I kind of know. Oh, no,
I'm ready to have it.
Sir, I'm trying to clean this up. Put it so good. Oh, go slow.
Yeah.
Alright, that's good.
I don't think that's coming off now.
Pencil?
I just tightened that on there. Oh, don't break it. It's my own pencil.
Alright, guys, let's continue on.
Jade.
Tightened it using a desk.
Or stop. Give it back.
All right, so let's move on.
Just sharpen that. I'm gonna sharpen it.
All right, let's go back to our notes, please. Kate.
They're broken pencil. Just sharpen your pencil.
Have to sharpen it with a razor. I said it was careful.